Why is it that the devil and hell are the predominant doctrinal beliefs and the things that are talked about the most? When I was a kid, I knew more and hell and sin than I did about God or about God's love. I was more afraid of dying and going to hell than I was sure I would go to heaven. I mean, I thought I was saved, but I never felt safe.
Welcome to episode 21 of the Grounded Presence Podcast. This is a place for exploring authentic identity, deep community, and an ever-evolving spiritual journey. I'm your host, Daniel Powell, and thanks so much for joining me today. This week, I'm sitting down with Jon Scott, who is the host of a podcast called the Holy Heretics. How about that name, huh? So he spent 24 years as a minister, and he is currently the lead minister at Unity Church in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and a pastor who runs a podcast called the Holy Heretics. Well, you just know that this is a guy I gotta have on the show because obviously he has been on quite a spiritual journey. Now, he describes his podcast as alternative theology for the spiritual misfit. And we cover a lot of ground today, and he's got some great insights to share from his lived life experiences. So we'll get right into it, but before we do, I've got a couple obligatory notes. First, the audio on our call was a little bit choppy. I did a pretty good job smoothing things out, but sorry in advance for any glitches in the audio signal. And the second note is just a warning that today's conversation does include a few curse words, just in case there are any younger ears in the audience out there. Now, John and I have a lot to cover, so let's get right into the conversation. Enjoy. All right, joining me today on the podcast is Rev Jon Scott. And John, you're just doing really cool stuff on your show and having great conversations. Welcome to the Grounded Presence Podcast. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Man, thank you for the invitation. Honored to be with you.
Now, I can hear those cicadas in the background.
Yes.
now, in Tennessee, is it cicada or is it cicada?
Well, actually, I'm the lead minister of a church in Chattanooga, but our home is in Georgia. And
okay.
So I would say that I would call them cicadas.
Okay. See,
yeah.
I grew up in Texas, and it's cicada out there. Maybe that's because I moved to Colorado, got some weird influence, but
it's potato and potato, right?
So you don't know this, but you're joining me for kind of a special episode today.
Okay. I love surprises.
It's episode 21.
Oh.
I think that means my podcast is old enough to drink.
Yes, I do believe that you are officially legal.
Now, the Holy Heretic seems to be the perfect person to join me on episode 21.
Well, if we're talking about drinking, yeah.
Now, unfortunately, when we're sitting down to record this, it's 9 a.m. on a Monday, so...
Yeah, but it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
You can crack open a cold one. I think I might wait a few hours at least. So,
well, see, I have Scottish and Irish heritage, and so we have beer for breakfast.
Oh, okay, good deal. Put those on the cornflakes, huh? Well, in lieu of cracking open cold ones at 9 a.m. on a Monday, what do you say you tell me about the what's been the best beer you've had in recent weeks, recent days?
Well, listen, I personally, I'm a Guinness guy, so that's my go-to. If I go somewhere that doesn't have craft beer, something that's local, or some kind of a good craft beer that I've been familiar with, then I'll go to Guinness. But the last place I went to and just had a beer, and I've really backed off of drinking beer just because I've been in a pretty serious physical fitness routine. So as a result of that, I've kind of backed off. But the last time I had one was actually it's called Hop Dang Diggity. And it is a very hoppy IPA beer called Hop Dang Diggity. And it is, I think it's like 8.5%. So it's high gravity.
All right. I'm not much of an IPA guy myself, but the last one that I had was, I recently moved out to North Carolina here, so
Okay.
I'm a little closer to Chattanooga over there. But have you ever had anything from Goodwood?
I have not.
Okay, so there's this hemp ghost. It sounds a little frou-frou-y, but man, that's good stuff.
Hemp Ghost.
Yeah, it's really salty, a little sour. They just do
nice.
something right over there at the Goodwood. So try it out if you get a chance.
Awesome. Yeah. How close to Franklin, North Carolina are you?
I don't know where Franklin's at. I'm about 50 minutes west of, or 50 minutes east of Asheville.
Okay. Yeah. So you're a little further away from Franklin, because there's a cool place there called the Lazy Hiker that is a microbrewery. And Franklin, North Carolina is actually where people can get off of the Appalachian Trail. And so you have a lot of people who are coming through who are campers and people who are hikers, serious hikers. Now, because some of them will hike from the Appalachian Trail all the way in Maine, clear down to North Carolina, coming off of the bottom end of the Appalachian Trail right there in Franklin. So if you're ever in Franklin, North Carolina, you need to look up the Lazy Hiker.
Cool.
Fantastic brews.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for the tip.
Yeah. But Asheville has plenty as well. Asheville, of course, is.
Yeah, you can't throw a rock, just like Denver.
Right, and it's a cool music scene too. So, yeah.
So let's get into it here. So you run the Holy Heretics Podcast. And
sometimes it runs me.
I can understand that. But you describe your show as alternative theology for spiritual misfits.
Yes.
And man, what a tagline. Like, there is so much packed into so few words. So for those listeners that haven't heard your show, unpack that a little bit.
Well, the thing about it is, this year I'll celebrate 24 years as an ordained minister. And I have pastored 3 churches, spent time in seminary. Sometimes they often resemble each other. But spent quite a bit of time actually to get a master's in theology. And after all of that searching and looking and being raised in a very strict, fundamentalist, evangelical, charismatic Christian environment, after all of the study, I found that I had more questions than I did answers. In fact, my study of Scripture and church history opened up a can of worms that just happened to be wigglers, man. And for anybody who's ever been a fisherman or a fisherwoman, you know what wigglers are. You open that can and they're everywhere. And this was true for me. So, when Scott Watkins and I started the podcast a few years ago, we were working through what would be a cool name, and then, of course, taglines. Just, we live in a world where there's not a whole lot that's new and creative, unfortunately. In fact, a lot of books, people won't trust you writing a book unless you have a lot of footnotes, and then it essentially becomes books about books, But we wanted a tagline. We thought it would be good for marketing and what have you, and so we he and I had experienced separate and somewhat together alternative theology, when it came to things like atonement through blood. We wanted to look at that. What does that really mean? And how does that affect our mentality to believe that God needs someone to die to shed their blood in order to be able to love all of humanity? And honestly, I personally was having more and more struggle with that, because as I had children and now have 5 children, as far as I know, with having children, I thought to myself, which one of them would I kill? Would I torture just so that I could love the rest of them? And it was hard for me to get my father head wrapped around that, thankfully, because otherwise I'd be a freaking psychopath. I mean, we lock people up for doing that in our society. So if we're more civil than God, it's a bit disturbing for me. And then I was raised on this really hard line rapture theology. At any given moment, Jesus was going to split the eastern skies. He was going to tear those clouds back. He was going to sound a trumpet. Probably Gabriel would sound a trumpet. It would start the horn section of heaven. would call us all home, sneaking the good ones out the back door, and the rest could go to hell or go through the Great Tribulation and have their head cut off. So these were things that we kind of wanted to challenge. Why is it that Christianity needs a virgin birth in order for Jesus' message to be relevant? Why is it that the devil and hell are the predominant doctrinal beliefs and the things that are talked about the most? When I was a kid, I knew more and hell and sin than I did about God or about God's love. I was more afraid of dying and going to hell than I was sure I would go to heaven. I mean, I thought I was saved, but I never felt safe. And, with a God that is cool with you one moment and prepared to burn you forever because you don't say the right words, or because, God forbid, you cuss, that God has an anger management issue, and that God is scary. That God is essentially mentally ill. And when I actually started working in mental health back in 2000, I saw the kind of behavior that this belief in God too, that people could do all kinds of heinous and terrible things to other people in the name of God and justify it with Scripture. And as that began to unfold to me, I was at a loss. I mean, it really sent me into what I call a crisis of faith. Now, I have a catchphrase that I use now where I say my crisis of faith led me to the Christ of my faith that I currently have. So the crisis now I'm thankful for. But that's kind of what happened, dude. Like, we ended up saying, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to explore all of this stuff in the midst of our own theological journey, not being experts. And we're going to do this live on the microphones in front of whoever decides to listen. So when folks listen to the Holy Heretics podcast, they're not listening to high theology. I mean, if you want that, you can go for Pete Enns. If you want that, you can go for Richard Rohr, which is all this. That's fantastic work. I just mean the Holy Heretics podcast was two guys deconstructing in real time microphones, asking ourselves, each other, these questions, and then offering a platform for other people to listen to the question, but hopefully enter into the conversation as well.
And that's so important. That's something I see lacking, like so many avenues lacking, just embracing the journey and like not having all the answers. That's awesome that you're doing that.
Well, it's so much about destination. It's not about the journey for at least the life I was living. It wasn't about the journey. Hell, as long as you ended up in heaven, that's fine. That's all that matters. Don't go to college. Don't go to school. I mean, I was raised, don't go to seminary because you'll be deceived by the devil. And of course, now they believe there's solid proof of that. Now that I'm a heretic, but
don't go to seminary because you'll be deceived.
That's right. That's right.
I've never heard anybody say that before. That's wild.
Oh my God. That's what that's what I was raised with.
Wow.
My dad, actually, I love my dad, but he was scared to death that we would go to seminary and be deceived by the doctrines there. And as a result of that, we would fall away. And from the church at large, I have fallen away. But from relationship with God, my relationship with God, whatever that is, and that's offensive to some people, and if it is to you, I apologize, and not to you, but even to your audience. Whatever God is, I feel closer to than I ever have before. I'm sitting outside right now in a neighborhood that's called Nature's Walk, and I spend so much of my time now just being quiet, contemplative, listening to the cicadas, potatoes, and patatas, and watching all of creation do what it does, and knowing that all of it, including the grass I'm looking at right now, all of it is an outpicturing of God. People say that's pantheism. Richard Rohr called it panentheism, which means God is in all of it because all of it is a creation of God. So that's where I'm at now, but I wasn't taught to enjoy the planet or even to take care of the planet. This is one of the reasons we have climate issues in our world now, because we have not taken care of the planet that we were told to take care of. But it didn't matter because you were going to go in the rapture, So, and now instead of rapture, I preach rupture.
Ooh, I want to see where you're going with
that's,
that.
I actually preach new birth, being born again, so that you can see, not go to. See, when I was growing up, it was preached to be born again so you can go to heaven. That's not what Jesus says in this eavesdrop of a conversation at night with Nicodemus, which, by the way, I think is interesting for all of your listeners who believe in being born again. I mean, I certainly do too, but to make a doctrine out of it is really nuts. I mean, this is one time in the entire Gospels that Jesus uses the phrase, you must be born again. One time in all of the Gospels. And then we made a huge doctrine out of it, where this is like it's the linchpin, it's the hinge by which you open the door to heaven or to a relationship with God. And so when I say rupture, I mean being born again, the water breaking, and you actually being able to shift in the way you think, shift in the way you perceive. And actually, when you shift in the way you think, now you've truly been born again, because that's what repentance means. It's the word metanoia, which means to change your mind, change your direction, change the way you think. And so in doing that, you become born again, because now you can see the kingdom of God that's already within you. It's not about going somewhere. It's about being awake to what's already there. And so that's what rupture is for me.
I heard you paint that imagery there. The water breaking. I'm not sure if this is what you're going for, but I just got this image of religion as kind of this incubator where you can grow in, but then poof, that water gets broken and you got to breathe fresh air. It's not this maybe spiritual milk, for lack of a better term, but you're breathing the real stuff. Then is that kind of the imagery you were going for? Is that something I'm putting on it?
Yeah. Well, no. Certainly, the breaking of the water is a associated phrase with the birthing of new life. But that's the idea. The idea. See, when I was growing up, the birthing of new life meant you renounced the world and all of its sins. Well, you can renounce all you want to renounce, but until you announce an awakening to your relationship with the unnameable, the unknowable. And when I say unknowable, what I mean is that I don't think we come into a relationship with God or with the perennial source, with ground of being, as Meister Eckhart called it. I don't think we come into a relationship with unknowing and with God or again, source, until we are able to push out of this womb of whatever form we came into. I have a phrase I use. We came from the world of the formless into the world of the form. Then somebody taught us how to fill out the forms. But what happened to inspiration rather than just information? Information is very valuable for living in this world of form. But inspiration is invaluable. You can't put a price tag on it. And for me, to be inspired is to be in spirit. And I think that's really what Jesus was talking about. Being able to, even in your humanness, with all of the conditioning that we're given, with whatever your religion is, whatever, even if are raised atheist and anti-religion, to be able to move aside from all of the conditioning that's been given to you and find your essential self and not live from the false self that someone else constructed. To me, that's what new birth is about. New birth is about being able to see this human existence through inspiration, being able to see the human existence for what it is. And now you essentially, as Buddha talked about the lotus that floats above the water, the lotus floats above the water, but actually never touches the water. It's interesting because there's green leaves between the flower and the water. And what's cool is that the root word for flower is flow. So being in the flow of life creates a flower. And that green that sits between, the lotus transcends the water, but it still sits in it. And I think we're invited to do that. I think that's what spirituality is that I think that's what phrases like you're in the world but not of the world. It's not that you're detached from people and not fully engaged with the human existence, but it's that you're able to navigate through this human life and never, ever, ever be separated from your root. And the root is the nowhere to now here. It's the world of no thing now living in the world of things. That's what we call making sense of spirituality, bringing it into the senses. So anyway, I just went on a tirade, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
That's beautiful imagery, and I totally dig everything you're saying. Even, I mean, I like pursuing things intellectually, but even hearing your, your little descriptions of atonement theology, or I forget what you said, but you said a few things in a row, and I just got this sense of like, yeah, I'm just kind of lost and confused. It's fun stuff to talk about, right? But something about where that takes my brain, it's just like it seems a little lacking, from that rootedness. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, it's a great hobby, but like, are we actually like diving into it and getting that the nutrient from that rootedness?
And I think the only way to do that, I mean, personally, my feeling on this, and I feel very strongly about this, that meditation and contemplation are the ways to reach that place. I think that's why the original Catholic monks and priests meditated and contemplated. A lot of people don't know in our world, especially in our Western evangelical world, that the Catholic Church is the oldest of the organized Christian religion. And before it became Roman Catholic, the Catholic practice was very much centered around contemplation, meditation, silence. As Rumi, the great Sufi poet, said, the voice of God is silence, and the rest is just poor translation. So they would sit in the silence, they would sit in this quiet, and they would listen. They would listen because they had two ears and one mouth. They would listen for the voice of presence, for the voice of source to speak to and through them. And it wasn't as much about great theology as it was about experience, right? So somehow we left experience and moved into explanation. And as a result, now we have dogmas, because dogmas are always born out of doctrine. And there's nothing wrong with having decent doctrine. But when your doctrine becomes the main point, now we've missed the point entirely. When theology becomes the main point, now we've missed the point, because relationship is more important than theory. And the root word for theology is theory. And so we're theorizing about what we think about whatever divine nature is. And that's great. That's fun. When we get into atonement theology, it's fun to kind of talk around it and talk through it and to it. And we talk about rapture theology, and let's talk about the inerrancy and infallibility of Scripture, and all of that stuff is fun, but it's not experience. Experience transforms the life.
Yeah, and when you kick
Doctrine
around all
and
these
theology. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, when you kick around all these different theories, like it teaches you something about yourself, like how you interact with them.
Oh yeah, man. Oh my gosh. In fact, I think that's really key for us to understand, as is said a lot in Zen and even in some Hindu practice, to become the observer rather than becoming the engager, somebody who's actively involved. Become the observer of how you react. Like, I don't really care how many scriptures you can quote. If you treat people like shit, then your theology is weak. Strong theology will lead you to be kind to others. Strong theology will lead you to recognize the divinity in other people. We see this through great sages and teachers throughout the generations. Even Jesus teaches us to love your neighbor as yourself, and goes further to say love your enemy. There's something that happens to someone who begins to become enlightened or an elevated soul. And elevated doesn't mean you're enlightened more than someone else or elevated more than someone else. That's not what it means. That means you're in competition and your ego is still in charge. Enlightenment is for you and you alone. It's not for you to try to become Jesus to the rest of the world and have a bunch of disciples. If that happens and you end up being a leader, that's great. But the greatest leaders are those who don't know they're doing it. So, if it doesn't lead us to compassion and it doesn't lead us to more kindness, which are a part of the flow of life, somebody asked me one time, said, what's the right way to read the Bible? And I said, well, I'm not sure what the right way is, but I'll say that if you read the Bible and it makes you more of a jerk, you're reading it wrong.
Man, I love your ideas. Let's get a little more into you.
Well, I kind of got the bird finger of Disfellowship from the
biblical term?
Evangelical Fundamentalist Church. Yeah, that is. It's found in the first book of parentheses. I kind of got that boot back back in 2008, really. Around 2009 is closer to it, because I started preaching what would have been termed back then universal ultimate reconciliation. I no longer preached the rapture. I basically took hell out of the doctrine, and people say, well, how dare you? Who gives you the authority? Well, I studied hell in the scriptures, and when I found that it was not a major doctrine, and that the definitions had been completely skewed and fractured, I just didn't preach them anymore. So when I made connection with our friend Bishop Jim Swilley, who was the founder and bishop of the Now Network and had a mega church in Atlanta called Church in the Now, I connected with their group, became ordained with them. Then a few years later, D.E. Paulk and Bishop Carlton Pearson and I started an organization called the Communion of Christ Consciousness. Essentially, I was sort of asked to leave because of my doctrines, and I went out and was on my own for a few years. But then in 2010, I was asked by Bishop Swilley to come and share at his church there in Atlanta, Church in the Now, because he was about to come out publicly with his sexual orientation. And so when he did that, of course, that sealed the deal for many people who thought I had gone astray. They said, well, certainly you've gone astray if you can work with a pastor who's gay. And so I stayed and worked with their church, taking care of all of their music department, pastoring their music team of about 60 people till about 2013. So really, it's been a little over 10 years, honestly. It's been a part of the evangelical church at large. There's still some evangelical churches that will have me come. I'm going to one in Tampa, Florida, the 1st of September. And that minister is just a friend of mine who was an NFL football player turned preacher. And so I'm going to go down and share with them. But, I mean, I've been a part of
what do they want from you? Like, hearing you talk, I'm like, what do you got for the conservative folk? Like, why do they want you to come in?
Well, I do think, and here's the thing. I have so many friends still who are very much what I would call hardline Christian. And what they've come to realize with me is that I may be a bit strange about some things. It's strange to them. It's different for them. Some of them would consider me a heretic, but they almost don't know what to do with me, because I still call them and I still check in. Because if I tell somebody I'm a friend, that's who I am. And there was actually one minister who greatly opposed me. And this is the rumor that came back to me. He said to someone else about a year ago, who was really running me down behind my back, to him, he said, I'm going to stop you right there. I don't agree with most of what he believes, but I'll tell you this. I've never known anyone who is less judgmental and more loving than him. And so I won't let you talk about him anymore. And this was somebody who blasted me on social media for a while. So, when the day is done, I think it's the love of God that apprehends the heart. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's the love of God that really can connect us. So, I won't be preaching at this church in Tampa. I'll just be doing music. Okay. But this minister said to me one time, he said, your doctrine is all over the place, but your anointing is undeniable. Now, that's charismatic terminology that those who are charismatic will understand.
Well, hey, so do you ever give like teachings or like preaching at conservative churches? Do they ever allow you in the pulpit?
I have. Well, that just happened last month, actually. I did give a talk at a Lutheran church, and they specifically were doing a 6-week series on faith and how faith is evolving. And so they actually wanted me to share my story completely, like very openly share my story. And it was a small congregation of people. There were probably 50 people in the congregation. And I told him, the guy that invited me, I said, "No, you sure you want me to share everything?" He said, "I'll share it all." He said, because they know that this is going to be an interesting 6 weeks. He said, we're even having a Muslim imam to come and share about what Islam is. And I said, wow, you guys are really stepping out there. So they opened the series with a heretic, me. And so I kind of broke them in. But what I noticed when it came to question time, because I really shared my story in about a 15-minute summation, because I really, the more I get into an experience with what I call God, with this relationship, the less I need to hear myself talk, right? So I really gave 15-minute summation and then opened up the floor for questions. And he kind of gave me a look like, are you sure you want to do this? And I said, yeah, come on. There was no negative question in the bunch. I did have one gentleman who said, well, do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, was born of a virgin, died on the cross, and rose from the dead? Well, I typically answer that kind of a question with a question. What part of that do you believe? Can you tell me why? And can you tell me why it matters? Now, I said that to him, and he wasn't ready to answer that question. And, it basically, it finally came to the end, and somebody said, well, you never really answered his question. I said, well, I don't think I need to answer that question, because I think the question is out of bounds until you can answer the question. So, anyway, that's kind of where I'm at. But it was a very interesting time. We all ate food afterwards and hung out and laughed and joked. And, I was fine with being the heretic for the night.
So I think you just answered my question through that, but I'll go ahead and ask it outright. Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you got to tread lightly around the way people define things and whatnot? Or do you just you're just you, full bore, and you like to engage?
Well, I do tread lightly sometimes, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why. I don't have a need to be right. I lost the need to be right. And what will typically happen, let's just say that I'm in a group of people where there's someone who I can tell immediately is very hardlined. They're very opinionated. They have this sense of certainty and knowing. I typically will just remain quiet through most of the conversation and occasionally throw questions, not at that individual. I will intentionally bring a question up while actually making eye contact with someone else in the group who's not as aggressive as the individual who is, they're not as aggressive as that person. I actually won't target them, because one of the ways that you can plant a seed is to do it without targeting the one who wants to be engaged in an argument. You can typically tell when somebody wants to fight versus wants to engage in truth, right? So most of us are more married to our belief than we are to truth anyway. So I will tread lightly simply because, again, I don't have a need to be right. I think that the need to be right automatically puts you in the category of wrong. And I don't typically use right and wrong because I try to stay non-judgmental, but I think you know what I mean. It puts you into a space of pride and narcissism, and I think it makes you unable to learn. So I think I can even learn from people who are hardline. I think everything and everyone that comes my way is my teacher. And so I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I like that. So there's one thing I really want to ask you. So I understand that you're a fourth generation minister.
Yes.
I don't even know what my great-grandparents' names were. So that's like lineage that I can't even fathom. And so you find yourself in this energy of like heresy, right? With the church that you grew up in.
Yeah.
I'm just so curious. Is that part of your lineage? Like, was there somebody else in your lineage who pushed the boundaries?
Well, I will say that my dad pushed the boundaries. Now, he, for me personally, pushed the boundaries in the other direction, toward even more strict and conservative than those that we grew up around. For instance, we grew up around evangelical fundamentalist doctrine, but my dad even went further. I'll give an example. And he would end up in arguments with people during Sunday school class because he saw Scripture a certain way, and this was his card. And I hesitate in using the words trump card, but this was his trump card. His trump card was, this is what the Holy Spirit has shown me, right? So if he got into an argument with you, he would say, essentially, this is what God showed me. Well, what does that do for you? That basically puts you in a position where now you're arguing with God, you're not arguing with him, right? So it was really unfair, but it was what he would do when he got cornered. But I'll give you, for instance, there are people I grew up with who believed in the doctrine of the rapture, that at the trumpet would sound, the dead in Christ would rise first, and then we which are alive and remain will be caught up together to meet the Lord in the air, and we'll ever be with the Lord, right? So this rapture was going to happen for people who were saved and were Christians. My dad went further, where he said, not all Christians are going to go in the rapture, because you must qualify to go in the rapture. My dad even had a preaching series called The Qualifications for Going in the Rapture. And it was very strict. It was very rigid. You must love the appearing of the Lord. If you don't love the appearing of the Lord, you're not going to go. You must live a holy life. No drinking alcohol, smoking, cussing, and hanging out with people who do. No looking at porn. No having sex outside of marriage. No going to the movies. I mean, he was serious and was almost considered heretical on the other side, if that makes any sense. So instead of being liberal, he was even more conservative than his father, who was also Pentecostal, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, dude, like I grew up in an area where, and some of your listeners may not know what the ATI cult is, but I grew up in the area where the ATI cult essentially got brought down by some girls who were a part of that religious cult in this area, who were sexually abused by the leader of that cult. And so everything, it's weird because Middle Georgia, where I grew up, it's a very interesting place. It's small and rural, but it has such far-reaching kind of arms that reach out from this area with some very weird religious stuff, right? But so my dad pushed the envelope, but again, he pushed it in the other direction. So we were raised with that kind of mentality. You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Jesus Christ is coming to town. You're right. He's making a list, checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty or nice. Jesus Christ is coming to town. So, yeah, I mean, but now my grandfather was a street preacher. So that's the next level too. He didn't believe in preaching in church. And he didn't believe in organized religion. He preached in the street. Very non-traditional. In fact, he got saved by listening to a drunk street preacher. That's
cool.
The story.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So from where you're at, I just got to ask you, like, where do you think we're headed just as a culture, as a people? Do you think that this whole, like, whatever journey of faith, religion, whatever you want to call it, do you think it's a journey where we're just going to, like, get to a destination? Or is it more of a generational thing? Because I hear you talking about your lineage, and I'm just kind of seeing, the circle of doctrine widen, and it becomes more inclusive, and then it constricts, and it's kind of like this dynamic breathing and like broadening and narrowing. Like, do you think that's the process, or do you think we get somewhere like more evolved in our thinking?
Well, I do think that we are evolving in our thinking. And when I see people like Richard Rohr, Mike Morrell, John Pavlovitz, Diana Butler Bass, Jen Hatmaker, Rob Bell, Pete. I see people like Peter Rollins, J. Baker, even guys like us on the Holy Heretics, guys like you on your show. This gives me hope that the Christian message is certainly going to evolve. Bishop Carlton Pearson, seeing people like that who are still on the outside of the inner circle, if that makes any sense, criticizing their own faith, that gives me hope that Christianity is going to make some really, really good evolutionary strides forward. We see that with what just recently happened with the United Methodist Church. And I hate to see splits happen because, when you split the atom, you have an atomic response, right? You have a nuclear response. But we're seeing those little explosions here and there. That gives me hope that, especially with guys like Richard Rohr, who just wrote the book, Universal Christ, that this is calling the Catholic Church back to a different way of thinking. It's calling the entire Christian faith back to a different way of thinking, with Pope Francis and his thinking being much more advanced and evolutionary, even through all of the sex crimes and that particular thing that's happening right now and needs to happen. Yes, I do believe we're going to make an evolutionary step forward, possibly even a leap forward. I think we're already doing that. But with that being said, I think we're probably only about 15 or 20 years away from the people who are doing that also solidifying that belief, if that makes any sense. I think it's human for us to say, okay, this is the new Christianity. Now let's hold the fort here. And then in another 50 years, 100 years, maybe longer, another group of people will come along and challenge that and move it forward. But at least we are making some evolutionary growth forward.
Well, I'm going to play my hand here. I disagree. Like, I think it's more of a process of, it's like I was saying, like constriction and like opening up, because I think, one generation goes too far with the dogma, and then the next generation goes too far with the experience, so like you kind of create this imbalance between generations. That's what I think anyways. So like you create a gap so that the other generation like needs to regress back to the dogma, and then the next generation needs to regress back to or whatever, push into the experience, of faith, God, whatever you want to call it, But hey,
well,
I gotta say,
that picture too.
It's going to be super interesting to see what happens in like 20 years. And I just moved to the the South out here, the Bible Belt. And it's like there's a crazy amount of churches, and like you walk into these churches and there's not a ton of people in them. And I'm just driving around wondering like what are these churches going to be in 20 years? Are they just all going to be like sold to people who own Etsy shops or something, become creative space?
I do think that is happening. I do think we're seeing another generation of people who are really reaching out toward a lot more Eastern thought. I do think that a lot more Eastern philosophy and Eastern thought is being invited even into the Christian conversation, right? You even hear, again, Father Richard Rohr, who I've cited several times during the show. It sounds like I'm a stalker, but the truth is I just think he's a wonderful voice in our world right now, at least in the Christian world.
I love Richard Rohr.
But he has certainly brought the conversation back to, well, he is kind of the Thomas Merton of our time, only he's getting more read time. He's getting more air time, right, than Thomas Merton did. And that's really essential because Thomas Merton was a hermit. He wanted to go and just be on his own. And Father Rohr is not, he's at least more social than Thomas Merton was. But these conversations are certainly, I think, giving the Eastern philosophies use to the modern, more liberal Christian church. But I think that your teachings and teachers like Bruce Lipton, like Joe Dispenza, Wayne Dyer, who transcended and left us a few years ago, even Marianne Williamson, who is a presidential candidate right now, Deepak Chopra, the list goes on of people who are teachers and preachers and sages and what have you. I think all of that is bringing up a lot of, with Bruce Lipton and with Joe Dispenza, they're bringing a lot of brain power, mind over matter kind of teaching and neurological breakthroughs. So, I think we're seeing a shift in religion, psychology, psychiatry, and science all at once. And it's pretty interesting to try to even keep up with it. But I think it's a beautiful thing.
So on this note of, progression and evolving and faith, and the way we're moving is like saying, don't judge, don't be judgmental. Don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
My fear of that is that it doesn't teach the younger generation the futility of judgment and like lead them into the broader experience of non-judgment. I think we're just swinging fundamentalists the other way and saying, don't do this, this is bad, right? So it's like anti-judgment is the new kind of fundamentalism in a sense. So a perfect story that pertains to this is in Denver, where I came from, there's this natural grocers sign that was on a bunch of the public transit buses going around, right? And it had just a black and white picture that was one of these animal rights bioorganic cage-free eggs. And it was just showing like some really sad-looking chickens and cages and whatnot. And it was just like, think about where you get your eggs or something, right? And I feel like that's what we're doing with this new philosophy of, don't judge, like don't be judgmental, be inclusive, is we're showing people a picture of it. We're showing people a picture of these, caged up chickens. And we're saying, no, do you want this? Like, this is bad. Marketing that to them instead of what I think people need to be encouraged to do if they're going to buy cage-free eggs, is say, you know what, like you should go investigate this for yourself. You should try to, go see an egg factory or whatever you call that. Are you tracking with me here?
Right.
So it's like, have the experience like a judge, but find the futility in the judgment,
Sure.
And even saying that, it's just like, I get all these feelings of like, oh my gosh, that's so risky because somebody has the potential to really go off the rails with that and be like a really judgmental asshole,
Sure.
And that's the same feeling of risk I get when it's like, when I'm confronted with diving into new theology and new doctrines and new spiritual experiences, but I think maybe I'm going on a rant here. Sorry.
No. And I think what you're talking about makes sense with the idea of contrast, living in a world of contrast. You don't know how bitter something is unless you've tasted really sweet, or vice versa. Night gives birth to day and day gives birth to night, and all of the process of contrast. And we live in a world of contrast. So in many ways, you really almost don't know how sweet, I'm air quoting, non-judgment is without experiencing some of what judgment actually is, or even becoming the judge yourself, so that you can, walk into a situation. And I agree that you can almost diminish the value and necessity of that kind of judgment by actually participating in judgment, because then you see, okay, this just really doesn't make any sense. Like, it's really not that valuable. It's a waste of energy, or I just don't want to spend that much energy on that kind of behavior. So, yeah.
So that's the question I'm struggling with, though. It's like, how do we, as a culture and as individuals, I got a 2.5-year-old daughter. So how do I, as a parent, how do I not just tell her not to judge, but how do I curate these experiences in her life that allow her to judge, but that also bring her the experience of the futility of judgment? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think it's up to us as parents to locate those opportunities, because you'll have plenty of them. It's not as if you won't. I mean, you'll run into that just with interactions between your daughter and her friends at school, or enemies at school, where you'll be able to say, now, see, this is what an enemy feels like, okay? Or this is what judgment feels like. And how did that feel? Well, it feels like shit. Of course, you may not say shit. And I said that twice on your show. Hopefully that's not going to be offensive to your audience. But, you'll be able to, I think, be able to show some of that contrast. I know I have with my children, to be able to say, well, how does it feel to be marginalized? Or how does it feel to be judgmental, or for someone to judge you? Or how would you like it if someone treated you that way? The golden rule, I think, is very important, and how that golden rule plays out without some kind of experience, I agree with you, is a very interesting waters to go into. However, now that we live in a world that is still extremely so judgmental, and you're right on both sides. I mean, you've got ultra liberal judging conservatives while saying, "Don't judge us," and you look at it and you say, "Well, but didn't you just?" Now you just, they're saying Trump don't call people names, but they're calling him a pig, and it's like, wait, hold on a second. You just said a second ago that he don't need to be calling people names and making fun of disabled people, but you just called him a pig. Essentially, you're doing the same thing. Like, when is somebody going to actually shine the light on this and do something different for once? So yeah, that can definitely be a frustration, but I think we still have plenty to work with. I don't think we're ever going to be free of judgment. I think we live in a world where we're going to have that constant state of contrast. So,
well, sorry, man. I kind of asked you a question and then I went on a rant.
No, it's quite all right.
Didn't really give you time.
No, I love it, and I love the subject you brought up, and it's a good question, and it's something I think that your listeners and even myself, we should think about. We should definitely put thoughts into what's that look like.
So what's next for you? Do you have anything big on the horizon? I know you just did season 4 of the Holy Heretics Podcast. Is there a season 5 coming soon? It
is a possibility. Right now, I'm in a real contemplative phase. I've also turned my energy inward toward my family. My 17-year-old daughter is in the process of building a music career. And so I'm helping her with whatever she needs help with, and that I'm not trying to control it, but just being available to her if she needs me. So we're writing songs and we're doing these little gigs together to get her really used to performing in front of audiences. Looking at possibly doing one of the talent shows here for her soon. She's a really fantastic singer, great artist. So I'm spending my energy really on that. And I'm back to working in neuroscience studies real time. I'm actually working with between 170 and 180 people who have been put into the technical category of criminally insane. Between 170 and 180 individuals like that weekly right now. So I'm really spending a lot of my energy working with them, gathering studies, being a part of their life, walking through the process. I'm working with, out of that group, there's probably 10 or 15 sociopaths. So it's given me the opportunity to real-time work with them from a spiritual standpoint and sort of watch what works and what doesn't. And that's the real rubber meets the road. I've been doing some work with a group that's connected in Iowa and in Atlanta of immigrants who were a part of the humanitarian crisis in Rwanda and in a small part of Kenya. A couple of different massacres that people are probably familiar with. You're probably familiar with the movie Hotel Rwanda that documented some of the things that went on. I'm working with some of the children and grandchildren of parents who were killed right in front of their children. In fact, one of the young ladies we're working with right now is suffering from PTSD. She was forced by the soldiers who came in, forced to watch her father be burned alive. They said, if you don't watch, we will kill you. So it's one of those things where right now my energy is really, really, really being used.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I'm staying, believe me, I said to someone the other day and they misunderstood what I said. I said I'm staying highly meditated these days. And they thought I said medicated. Mm-hmm. And I said, yes, meditation is the best medication. So
I feel like that's the only way you could do all that heavy work. Wow. Good luck to you in that. And man, I'm sure that's going to be such a teacher for you.
It's meaningful work. It really is.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for doing the work you're doing in the world.
There you have it. Jon Scott, the Holy Heretic himself. Now, do you see what I mean when I said we were going to cover a lot of ground today? There was a lot in there. And if there was any one thing in particular that stood out to you, I'd love to hear from you what that was. Please send me an email and let me know at thegroundedpresence@gmail.com. My favorite piece of what he said today were his words about losing the need to be right. That's something that I need to learn so much more of in my life. Well, if you're enjoying the show, please rate and review it on iTunes. Those really help the show out. And make sure to connect with the show on Facebook and Instagram at The Grounded Presence. As always, I will see you right back here in 2 weeks' time. Bye.